In this module, we will be creating shooting behavior for our player character, and that will entail an animation state that plays whenever the player character is shooting, and of course the ability for the player character to shoot projectiles. The first thing we'll need to start the shooting behavior is a player input. So let's navigate to some of our project settings here. Under Edit Project Settings, I'm going to open this up. We're going to look for inputs under Engine Input, and we're going to look at some of our action mappings. Previously, jump was set up. That's part of the template for this project. It's set up in the 2D side scroller Epic template. We're going to add another one by pressing the plus button. And we're going to name this anything we want, anything that you would want to add to your character. In this case, we want shoot. And for the actual mapping, we're going to map it to the gamepad. Primarily make games like this for gamepad use. Then later, I'll think about the keyboard mappings if it's necessary. So for this, we want trigger. Let's see if I can find it by typing trigger. Okay, so we want right trigger, gamepad right trigger. And of course, you can add ones later if you want other ways to trigger the shooting behavior. So now that's there, that should be auto-saved. We'll close this. Now once that has been done, it gives us the ability, we'll build this under our jump events here. It gives us the ability to right-click and look for shoot. And we can find now an action event for shoot now that we've created the input. Input action shoot. So a couple things we want to happen here. We want something to happen on pressed and released under the input action shoot. For now, let's just start on the press. Basic there is we always want to keep track of whether the character is currently shooting. So we're going to set shooting to true when this is triggered, and when it's released, we'll consider that when the player is not shooting. This will enable us to create sort of a machine gun firing, it fires as long as you pull the trigger, and it stops when you're either out of bullets or you release the trigger. And there's another check we want to make here. For the sake of our game design, we're not going to have the player available to be shooting while jumping. So we want to check the jumping boolean here and drag off the boolean to do a branch check. I'll type in branch for flow control. There's our branch check, and we want this to only happen when jumping is false. And also, let's see, we also want it to be if you're already shooting, you can't shoot again. We don't want you to, in this particular design anyway, we don't want you to have sort of an infinite shooting as fast as you can, pull the trigger thing. You might want that for your game, but in this case, we don't want that. So we're going to pair these booleans together. So our branch check uses a logic which couples them all together. So we'll do an AND boolean, but we want this to be when they're both false. So if jumping, we'll right click off of this and do a not. If not jumping, and I'll just copy C, copy V this for another not, and also is not shooting. And then we'll check these. So if these are both not true, that gives us a true result. I realize that sounds a little backwards, but that's the way that works. If is jumping is not true, and if is shooting is also not true, that is true. So we have is shooting. So that's our first bit of logic. Next, we want to have a look at our handle movement. We only want the character to be moving when they are not shooting, and they are also not being hit at that moment. So we're going to expand this part of the template a little bit here. We're going to drag out the comment box to give us some more room. And I'm going to move this input axis move right event out here so that I can insert another node, a branch check. I'll just disconnect that. And we want an either or check on this. So from the condition, I'm going to drag down here and drag out an or Boolean. And we're going to add two of our Boolean variables here, is shooting and is hit. So we'll drag them and connect the pins here. And I'll just resize this a little. Okay. And so if either of these are false, we will allow the input to flow through the rest of the event. With our input conditionals in place, we'll go back to our input action shoot. And the next thing we want to do, we'll get more into the animation a little bit later, but right now we're just going to work on getting a projectile going from the player. So what we're going to do here is we're going to just drag off this and we're going to spawn an actor. You need to spawn a projectile here. So we'll spawn actor from class. And eventually when we have our projectile that moves forward, once it's spawned automatically, we'll be spawning that. But right now we need to find a location for our spawn transform. So if we go to our viewport, right now we can use we'll use just the arrow component that comes inherited with this player character. We have an error during compilation right now, but we'll fix that in a minute. So we're going to use just the arrow as a spawn point. And let's see if I go here, we'll drag a reference to the arrow. And we will get its world transform. And we'll connect the world transform to the spawn location, which is called spawn transform here, and that should compile. Not yet, because we have no actor class. Okay, and that's what we need next, is an actor class. So we'll go ahead and we'll create a basic blueprint class. Go into our BP folder under side scroller demo. We'll right click here. And let's see, we'll create blueprint, just blueprint class. I don't think there's there's no basic projectile for that. So we'll do blueprint class. And this will just be an actor that's spawned in the world. So we'll choose actor. We'll call this BP projectile. So we'll open this up. In order for us to test out the BP projectile visually, we're going to add a component here that allows us to see it once it's spawned in the world. Now let's start off with just a simple sphere mesh component that will at least give us something to look at when we launch the projectile in the level. Just a tiny little thing there, and we need an actual way to make it move forward, I guess you could say. So we're going to look for projectile movement component. This is a handy thing here. We're going to use this. This makes it move forward according to its facing. So we'll just set a few variables here. Projectile initial speed 0 starts at 0, means it won't move at all. We'll increase this to 300. Let's try that. And let's see, these other values we don't really need to worry about right now. We're just we just want our projectile to move forward. So we'll just compile and save that. We'll make sure this sphere is set to show in the world. It's not hidden or anything. Visible, hidden game, no. Okay. So let's see, now if we close this, we go back to our player character, and we choose our projectile. If I type projectile, we find it there. So we'll compile and save. We get no errors because we have a transform. And for collision handling, we want always spawn ignore collisions. We don't want that to collide with the player itself or anything silly like that. That wouldn't really help us in this case. So let's see if this works now if I test this out. If I go here and I hit play. All right, so I can still move left and right. If I pull the trigger now, we see a couple things. One thing we see is the animation is not showing up because we haven't plugged in the animation yet for shooting. We also see our projectiles headed downwards, pulled down by gravity. So we want our projectile to just move straight forward from whichever way we're facing infinitely, left and right across the screen. No drag, nothing pulling it down. So I'm going to quit out of the viewport window for play and go back to our projectile here. One factor we need to change in the projectile movement component, and that would be our projectile gravity scale. I want this to be set to 0. And if I save this and go back to our player character and check this out, what we should see is now the projectile shoots across the screen. Because we edited our projectile movement component to have 0 gravity effect on our projectile, we get this kind of movement. Next, we'll work a little bit on the sprite-based appearance and behavior of our projectile.